Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you, Hamza?
Alhamdulillah, I'm great. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. I don't know, my camera's acting weird, but I'm still talking.
Uh-huh.
You can see me?
Yeah, I can see you. I
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay. So Alhamdulillah, today, we have a good friend and a guest. Uh, his name is Hamzah Raza. He is a graduate.
Yeah.
He's graduated with his master's degree in Islamic theology, right?
Islamic studies, yeah.
Islamic studies. So I'm going to let Hamza introduce himself a little bit. Let us know what we're going to be talking about, inshallah.
Yeah, so inshallah today we'll be talking about I want to talk about Imam Jamil al-Amin, not just as like a historical actor and like with the case that he has, but also as like a sort of thinker. Because oftentimes I think people ignore the fact that he's like this great like theologian and really this important figure in American Muslim history.
Okay. So what's it called? I really didn't know too much about Imam Jamil al-Amin. Obviously, I had looked it up. I had watched some videos in the past. But when I spoke with Hamza last month, I was like, I want to bring you on. And he was like, let's decide on a topic. And when we decided on the topic, Hamza was like, I want to do Imam Jamil al-Amin. And I was like, give me some content or something like that I can look up. And I Googled, and I think the first article that popped up was that one, there's a nutcase. I think, what's his name? Daniel Pipes? His viewpoint on it. I read that one. It was quite interesting. So obviously he's entitled to his opinions, but alhamdulillah, we have Brother Hamza. He's going to be filling us in and letting us know the truth, the interesting facts about him, and basically Imam Jamil's life story.
Yeah, Daniel Pipes is a whack job, by the way. Daniel Pipes, when the war first started in Syria, they were asking like who the United States government should support. Like, should we support the rebels? Should we support like the Assad regime? And Daniel Pipes said, you should support whoever's losing. And he's like, that way, like more. He said you should always support who's losing. That way, like there's more chaos and more people die. And he said this on like some like morning talk show. Like Daniel Pipes hates Muslims. Like if the rebels are down, you give them more support, and if they like do better than the Assad regime, then you give them more support.
So basically, make like a cesspool or like a swamp.
Yeah, I mean that's what Daniel Pipes wants. He just wants to see like more like people in like, Muslim majority countries die.
Yeah, that's sick.
Yeah, Daniel Pipes is evil.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there. Robert Spencer, if you listen to him, and Daniel Pipes, if you read his stuff, Pamela Geller, a good one. All these people, they're just they're unnecessarily and unneedingly they're Islamophobic, but they're unneedingly like, what do you call that? Like sick-minded?
Yeah, it's just like a pathological like hatred of Muslims, of like just people who aren't white in general. It's just like white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean that's a nice way of saying they hate everybody else.
They hate everybody else. Exactly.
Yeah, white supremacy is a nice way of saying that.
Yeah.
But what's it called? But let's get into it, Hamza. I mean, are we? Is there anything else we need to discuss beforehand?
You kind of, I got triggered with the whole Daniel Pipes thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, Daniel Pipes is a person who would trigger anybody.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I sent you a picture earlier today. I don't know who that person is. The one where they're like, basically Donald Trump is like an ardent supporter of Muslim sort of deal. With this whole Joy Reid situation where she compared Donald Trump supporters to Muslim terrorists or something like that.
Oh, yes.
And Donald Trump sent out a tweet in support of Muslims.
MashaAllah.
And then this guy wrote an article for Fox that how Joy Reid and Ilhan Omar are anti-Muslims and Donald Trump is a Muslim supporter.
MashaAllah. The incoherence of American politics.
But it was interesting.
Yeah, but so let's get into it. Imam Jamil, I mean, he was born H. Rap Brown, Hubert Rap Brown. And one actually really, really interesting thing about him is he was he was very influential in kind of like the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement,
Yeah.
and he's around in the 60s, in kind of involved in the civil rights movement. And the 60s and 70s is also when rap music starts to kind of develop as a genre. And the word rap actually comes from H. Rap Brown because Imam Jamil al-Amin was known for having a way with words.
Okay.
He was known for being a very kind of charismatic person, a very good speaker who could put words together.
Okay.
So the verb like rapping is basically like if your name is like Asad and like someone's doing something that Asad does really well, it would be like calling it like Asading, right? I'm sorry, we have this clock in my house that marks the hour, but the clock is backwards. I mean, the clock.
It's like 11:07. It's kind of
Yeah.
It's a Daisy clock.
Yeah, the clock is 7 minutes late.
Yeah, very
But-
Daisy.
But the word rapping comes
Yeah.
from like speaking charismatically, like he used to rap
Okay.
or he used to speak because his
I,
name.
I always wondered about that because obviously that was his name and I knew that, but I always wondered if that was truly the correlation between it.
Yeah. So whenever anyone listens to rap music, like you know how Muslims like to say like we created like everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I mean we did create a lot of things like algebra and stuff.
It's like,
Like rap music is literally named after an imam.
oh, okay, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
What's
So-
the for that?
So he's involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was, they engaged in like the sit-ins and the push for like voting rights in the South. They're very influential kind of in the civil rights movement. And oftentimes you could understand SNCC as sort of the independent student wing of what Martin Luther King Jr. used to do.
Okay.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, they were kind of like the people who were kind of like they were the people who'd get publicity. These are kind of like the older preachers. These are the people doing more of the news interviews. And the people in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, are the people who are actually going to lunch counters and getting arrested. And there's a little bit of friction because naturally the young people are a bit more radical than like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Yeah.
So Imam Jamil,
More emotional.
a bit more emotional, a bit more passionate.
That's-
all these sorts
That's anywhere you go, though. The younger people are always more emotional.
Exactly. So Imam Jamil al-Amin is head of SNCC's branch in the DC area. And
Where is he from? I don't mean to cut you off, but where is Imam Jamil originally from?
So he's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Oh, okay, so he's from the South.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, he went to the same high school as Imam Umar Suleiman.
Oh, okay.
Many, many years apart. He's much older than But so he moves up to DC actually because his brother is attending Howard University.
Okay.
And he becomes kind of head of the DC affiliate of SNCC, which is called the Nonviolent Action Network, the Nonviolent Action Group. And they do these protests outside of the White House where 24 hours a day, they are outside of the White House, like banging drums, making a lot of noise. And they enter a meeting with the president at the time, Lyndon B. Johnson. And Lyndon B. Johnson says to them, like, I think the goals of what you guys are doing is very noble, this and that. But my daughters can't sleep at night because of your 24-hour protest with all this noise. And Imam Jamil al-Amin, who is at this time H. Rap Brown, he said, I feel really bad that your daughters couldn't sleep for a night or two. But Black people in America haven't been able to sleep for 400 years. And he says, maybe our meeting can address that. And this kind of rapping, you could call it on his part, this like way with words that he has catches the attention of all the newspapers and stuff. And they're like, this kid in his early 20s, this activist in his early 20s really told off Lyndon B. Johnson. So Congressman John Lewis was the chairman of SNCC at this time. And he's followed by Stokely Carmichael, who also plays like a really big role in the civil rights movement and later on the Black Power movement. And then Imam Jamil al-Amin comes next as chairman of the movement. And the earlier people in the movement, people like Congressman John Lewis, they believe in nonviolence as a principle.
Okay.
So it's like a moral value for them to be nonviolent. Stokely Carmichael, on the other hand, and H. Rap Brown, and a lot of the younger people within SNCC. So SNCC also has like older people and younger people. A lot of the younger people within SNCC, they believe in nonviolence as a tactic. They say it's strategically good to be nonviolent, but we will use violence if necessary and if it's tactical. So Imam Jamil al-Amin, when he becomes A-Trap Brown at this time, he hasn't become Muslim yet, he is the chairman of SNCC, and he changes the name from Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to Student National Coordinating Committee. And when the people ask him, why did you change the name? Why did you take the nonviolent out of the name? And he says, because we are a proud American organization, and violence is as American as cherry pie, which is also a very kind of famous quote of his.
Yeah.
And at this time, there's the COINTELPRO program happening. COINTELPRO was this FBI program of government surveillance. And one thing that the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, feared was what he called the rise of a black messiah. And he said, I fear this charismatic African-American figure who can sort of be a messiah for black people in America and unite them around, fighting for their rights, advocating for themselves. And he mentioned many possible kind of black messiahs. He said Martin Luther King Jr. is one of these people.
Yeah.
Malcolm X is one of these people. A-Trap Brown is one of these people.
Really?
Stokely Carmichael is one of these people. So at this point, his wife is actually contacted by the FBI, and she is asked to spy on her husband on behalf of them. And there are many stories about this in the civil rights movement.
Very nice job offer.
Yeah, very nice job offer, right? Are you going to spy on your husband for us, right? And this happens to a lot of people, actually. Malcolm X is approached by the FBI and asked to spy on Elijah Muhammad. He, tells them to leave. The FBI has recordings of Martin Luther King Jr. having extramarital affairs, all of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And Edgar Hoover actually writes him a letter, and he basically tries coercing him into suicide.
Yeah, I remember that. They were trying to mentally destroy him.
Exactly. And the FBI in Chicago actually killed 2 members of the Black Panther Party. So it's very, very the FBI is very much kind of invested in getting rid of these people because they know that the power that these people have in sort of destabilizing an American society that's very much built on racism and very much destabilizing kind of the racist structures of the society. So Imam Jamil al-Amin is eventually arrested for inciting, crossing state lines to incite a riot. And the Civil Rights Act of 1965, it was lauded as this great civil rights legislation, but it includes a provision which is called the A-Trap Brown Law, which was actually named after him.
There's an actual law.
Yeah, there's a law named after him within this kind of Civil Rights Act. And it makes it illegal to cross state lines to incite a riot. So he gives a talk in Cambridge, Maryland. There are riots, and the riots later, it turns out, or there are fires in the city that night. And later it turns out that those fires in the city are because of negligence from the Cambridge, Maryland Fire Department, which has a bad relationship with kind of predominantly black neighborhoods, and they're not quick to kind of, stop fires in that neighborhood. So fires kind of spread because of the negligence of the police. But Imam Jamil al-Amin,
let me just give you an example before you go on. It's even if you get in a car accident and you're towards the black side of town a lot of times, and the police department is less than half a mile away, sometimes it takes them about 15-20 minutes to make that half-mile trek down there because they're just so negligent when there's an accident that happens in that area in today's time. So I can just imagine back then that they'd just be let it burn.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the realities that he is talking about in the 60s are all too present today. Actually, Trump's attorney general, when the protests were happening a couple of weeks back, he actually cited the A-Trap Brown Law. And he said those who cross state lines to incite a riot will be arrested. Okay. So Imam Jamil al-Amin ends up going to jail for inciting a riot, and he is sentenced to 5 years in prison. And in prison, he ends up becoming Muslim through the Darul Islam movement. Okay. And this is very interesting, actually, because most African Americans, particularly in the 60s, how do they end up usually coming to Islam, would you say? How would you, what organization do they usually come through?
Well, I suppose it's Darul Islam movement.
He comes through the Darul Islam movement, but most people come through the Nation of Islam, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But Imam Jamil al-Amin is from the start a Sunni Muslim. He's
Okay.
going to start like an Orthodox Muslim.
Okay.
And he spends time in jail, and then he travels to India. He travels to Pakistan. He spends time in West Africa. He spends time in the West Indies, and he goes on Hajj. And after he goes on Hajj, he goes to the West End neighborhood of Atlanta. And in the West End neighborhood of Atlanta, he becomes imam of a very, very small masjid there. And he has this whole plan to clean up the community.
Yeah.
The way he cleans up the community is he uses the charisma that he had from like the civil rights days, and people respect him as this major figure in the civil rights movement. And now he's an imam, now he's a Muslim, and he's really really dedicated to kind of the spiritual resurrection of his community. He actually has a really really good book. It's called Revolution by the Book by Imam Jamil al-Amin, and I really really think every single Muslim should read it. It really gives like the rudimentary basics of Islam in a way that's kind of encouraging of like a sort of social activism that benefits the society around you. So he basically converts most of this neighborhood to Islam. He knocks on doors, he gives dawah, all of these sorts of things. And the West End in this time is described as, they call it a black Makkah. You go in the streets and the azan is called from the masjid, and everyone in the neighborhood can hear it. They call it out loud. Everyone in the neighborhood hears it. There are, women in hijabs, young men like with like kufis on, with topis on, and it's a whole community that revolves around this imam. And so it ends up being a community of about 400 families.
Wow.
Yeah. And Imam Jamil al-Amin, one thing that he does is, this is in the midst of the crack epidemic that is, plaguing African American communities. Yeah. And he basically,
right?
Say that again?
80s?
This is the 80s, yeah.
Okay.
The 80s into the 90s. And he basically tries to put a stop to like the drug dealers in the community. Okay. So a lot of these drug dealers will actually end up converting to Islam and getting rid of kind of their drug dealing activities. Other people, they might not become Muslims, but he tells them, if you're going to deal drugs, you can't live in this neighborhood. So you have a choice. You either stay in the neighborhood and you don't sell drugs, or you leave and you can do whatever you want outside of my neighborhood.
Just don't do it here.
Say that again?
Just don't do it here.
Just don't do it here, yeah. So he does a really, really excellent job of cleaning up this neighborhood. And he's widely respected by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And another thing that they do in Imam Jamil al-Amin's community is that you don't go to the police. You go to the people in the community who can kind of take care of issues. So if a woman is getting beat by her husband, let's say a woman, hypothetically, non-Muslim, she has 2 children. She's not in a situation where she can like really leave the marriage. But if her husband beats her, she can't really call the cops, because then her husband has a criminal record. Her children will be harmed, all of these sorts of things. So her choices, originally will be either she takes like domestic violence, or like her family suffers. So it's either she suffers or her family suffers. And really, if she suffers, then her family is also going to suffer. So it's just suffering either way, right? But Imam Jamil al-Amin's community has this mode of kind of community policing and restorative justice and all these sorts of things. So the woman, even though she's hypothetically non-Muslim, non-Muslims will call the masjid board, and the masjid board will take care of the man who is beating his wife and get him to stop doing it. And what this usually means is that the masjid board will beat him up so he doesn't do it again. But there was a means in this place where the leaders in the Muslim community are also kind of watchdogs over the entire neighborhood, Muslim or non-Muslim.
I would imagine they would probably mediate first and try to fix him verbally before they sort of like beat him down.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I shouldn't speculate. I don't know the procedures of restorative justice.
But basically, they would try to keep the family together and make sure there's no more domestic violence.
Yeah. So he's really this excellent thinker on how to kind of build a Muslim community that isn't just a community built around, Muslims, but something that is built around benefiting society. And this is the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. In Surah Anbiya, it says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Not Muslimin, not mu'minin, not, not the Muslims, not the believers, but we have sent you as a mercy to every single thing that exists. We have sent you as a mercy to all of mankind.
Exactly.
So it's a really, really important lesson that we as Muslims, we have to be a rahmah for everyone.
Exactly.
And the way he creates this community is he centers it around prayer. So he says that if you want to turn your life around, the first thing you have to do is turn yourself around. This is his favorite verse in the Quran, verse 11 of Surah Ra'd. Allah doesn't change the condition of a people until they change what's in themselves. And he says that this is what the civil rights was missing. The civil rights movement, we are missing the spiritual component. That in order for us to transform society, we have to transform our own selves. We have to defeat our nafs. We have to purify ourselves. And he says you start with purifying yourself, you purify your family, you purify the broader community around you. And if we all do that, then the world will be purified of all the various ills that exist within the world. So, and every Friday, he would give the Jummah khutbah on the importance of Salah. And he says that this is the most important thing for a Muslim. Because he said every single other obligation, there are exceptions to. The vast majority of the people living in his neighborhood probably won't get the chance to do Hajj. Hajj is like super expensive. It's like $10,000. Fasting during Ramadan, there are old people, there are sick people, they might not be able to do that. Zakat, if you don't have wealth for a year, you can't do that. The Shahada is just something you say once and you internalize. But Salah is the one thing that for Muslim males, there's no exception to. It's 5 times a day, every day for the rest of your life, unless you're like in a coma. So he really, really emphasizes the importance of prayer. And if people in his community were not showing up to the masjid for Salah, he would actually knock on doors and ask them what's wrong. So he was someone who really, really cared for his community, and he really cared for the tarbiyah, for the spiritual cultivation of the people within this community. And this is how he transformed the entire neighborhood. So there's so many lessons for that, for us as, people who want to, create Muslim communities, as people who want to transform societies, as people who want our deen actualized, within the world. So that's really the important thing of Imam Jamil al-Amin as like a thinker. Yeah. Do you have any questions? I feel like I'm not letting you talk as much.
Oh no, that's fine. I mean, I'm just listening and basically learning, because like I told you before, I've read a little bit about him. It's been some years. Obviously, I've read about his case. I don't really. I know his son is on Facebook. I see some of my friends. They're from Atlanta. I did my hifz in Atlanta, so I was back. I was there between 2003 to 2005 or 6. I've seen his son play basketball and stuff like that, but I really never knew about the whole thing until maybe the last 10 years. And the one thing that was really, I guess, appalling or alarming to me is how he's seen as this sort of large figure, not larger than life, but a pretty big figure, who helped out in the civil rights movement, who's done a lot for his community, and there doesn't seem to be enough, I guess, attention paid to his case. I mean, I imagine there's enough, but I mean, there's small, big. There's a lot of different things going on all throughout the Muslim community, and there's a lot of havoc. And then obviously with our masjid boards and stuff like that, we're usually so involved or so worried about stuff going on at our own masjid that this is something major, that a person who essentially changed the lives of thousands of people and thousands of people to come, and he's sitting in a prison for the past 20 years, and we haven't gotten to the part about him getting arrested and all of that, the case yet. But I mean, just looking at it, it's like he's been in prison for the past 20 or 20 plus years, and he's an old man now. He's like in his 70s, I believe, and he's sitting in a Supermax facility. Like, what is this 72-year-old guy gonna do? I mean, and it's just so appalling about how less the attention is paid to these kinds of things. And it's not to say that there are other important things that we're not paying attention to. It's like our brothers and sisters right now, CARE is raising a lot of, what's it called? They're making a lot of shor, as we see in Urdu. I can't correlate the English word right now for some reason. But it's like they were feeding the prisoners down there in the South Florida prison. They were giving them no choices of food, and they were like feeding them pork and stuff like that. And finally, they were like, "Oh, okay, this is wrong. Fix this." Mm-hmm. So it's not to say there's other issues which aren't as important, but this is something like you have a guy who's in his 70s. He's sitting in a prison, and it's just so appalling. And like I said, after you said that, I Googled. The first thing I did is I Googled, and the first article that pops up is a Stupid Idiot's article about what he thinks about how everything happened, and basically taking speculation and his own ideology, the article is going to be a bunch of crock. So for people like you and for others to shed light on this, so even if we can't do anything, right, at least we can make dua for him and we can learn the truth about him. And that's one of the reasons, inshallah, I intend on bringing you on in the future, and we can talk about other things as well. But this was, as soon as you said, let's talk about this, I said, yeah, it's fine, it's cool, because this is something that our community should know about, has happened, will happen, and shouldn't happen.
Yeah. And he's someone we should be very proud of. That this is not just like any imam. Like, this is not just like the average imam of like some masjid. This is someone who was one of the most important figures in the civil rights movement.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the most important organizations in the civil rights movement. And he basically says that for us to achieve the goals of the civil rights movement, which is the liberation of African Americans, that cannot be achieved without Islam. And as a Muslim, he has the same fervor, and he's able to lead one of the most important and one of the most exciting communities in American Islam. And this is something that's really important. Like, Muslims in America, we have such a rich history, and so few of us know anything about that history.
I mean, we barely know about our Islamic history in general. To ask Muslims to learn about American Islamic history would maybe go over their head. I mean, I'm not trying to insult or offend anybody, but sometimes when you say that the Muslims, when there's a generalization that, if you listen to the Muslims, they fought the Persians and then they fought the Romans. But in actuality, the Muslims were fighting the Byzantine Empire. It was the actual Romans that they were fighting, but a lot of people don't even know that. And then, for example, the social reforms, like they have in Ireland and places like that a lot of those, they're pulled from Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu's own social protocols that he had for the Muslims and the non-Muslims, and they're built around that. Where, I don't know if you've heard the story, you probably have, about how at the time of Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, one time there was a lady, she didn't have any milk or anything for the child, and he came back and he led the Fajr, and the whole time he was crying, and the Sahaba didn't understand why. And he was like, how many children has Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu killed? Because the story goes along the lines of, the lady, she wasn't feeding the child breast milk, but she said that Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu has a mandate that any child that is not breastfeeding gets a sort of like a, what do you call that? Like a gift, like some money. So that's why she was trying to wean the baby off of the breast milk. And Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, he leads Fajr, and afterwards he's crying that, oh Umar, how many children have you killed because of this mandate? And he changed it that any child born in the Islamic kingdom is given this hadiyah, regardless of whether the breast milk or not. And then he made sure that elders, regardless of whether they were Muslim or non-Muslim, were taken care of. So you have all these social justice reforms that come from Muslim society, which I imagine were in Imam Jamil al-Amin's community, but we don't even know about these things. And a lot of countries, they base their rules and regulations off of Islamic history, and we're not even paying attention to it.
Yeah. So Imam Jamil al-Amin is creating this really extraordinary community that really builds on a leadership of, like, if you go back to the Khulafa al-Rashidin, like you said, there were these people who also transformed communities and really built like very just societies. So his community is really a reflection of the community of like the rightly guided caliphs radiallahu anhum, and those Khulafa al-Rashidin are reflections of the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the state that he ran in Medina. So Imam Jamil al-Amin is a man who really just implements the Sunnah in the way that he does things, and he's someone that we should be very proud of. And I think about this, he's in his 70s at this point, right? 30, 40 years from now, inshallah, me and you will possibly be around, but there isn't a very big chance that he'll be around, right? But he's someone that we really should remember, and we should carry on the legacy of, and someone that we should tell future generations about, someone we should learn about, all these sorts of things. And I'll get into the case, but also someone that we should help on with his remaining time on this earth. So while he is, really transforming this neighborhood, while he's committed to the spiritual and social resurrection of this community, the FBI is still spying on him from the COINTELPRO days of him being in SNCC and all of this sort of stuff. So they talk about the importance of neutralizing this Black Messiah, and they're still surveilling him and kind of attempting to neutralize him in this manner. So the FBI has a 44,000 word file on his Muslim community in Atlanta. So they are spying on this community for decades. Think about that, 44,000 words. If you were to like put that into a book, like it would be like, almost 1,000 pages of just spying on him. This is the kind of files that the FBI is keeping on his Muslim community. And from between 1992 and 1997, the FBI spies on him for everything from domestic terrorism to gun running to I think it's 19 homicides, 14 homicides that they spy on him for, right? So the FBI is really, really trying to pin a crime on him. And every single time he gets exonerated of the crime. There's one example in his neighborhood in West End. A man gets shot in the leg, a non-fatal shooting. The FBI investigates none other than Imam Jamil al-Amin for the shooting. The question arises: why is the FBI investigating, a 21-year-old man getting shot in the leg? This is not something that the FBI like really has an interest in investigating, but they're clearly trying to sort of pin a crime on this man. He actually meets the young man who was shot in the hospital, and the young man actually ends up becoming Muslim after speaking to Imam Jamil al-Amin.
Wow.
But there's this government campaign to sort of pin him with a crime, and eventually in 2000 he is stopped illegally by police at a traffic stop, and he gets some sort of ticket, and courts would later rule that he was pulled over unnecessarily, and it violated his legal rights and all this sort of stuff. He's scheduled to go to court for this kind of ticket that he's given, and there's a snowstorm, so his court date gets canceled and it never gets rescheduled. And after that, there's a warrant for his arrest. So on the day of Eid in 2000, he leads the Eid Salah in his community of 400 families, and he has like a small store that he runs across from the Masjid. So the police show up to the store, and he's not there. And there's a man in front of the store, and this man later will confess to the crime. His name is Otis Jackson. So this man is on parole, and he has illegal guns on him. So when the police pull up on him, he says to himself, if the police come, they're going to see that I have illegal guns, and I'm going to go to jail. So I might as well try my chances and engage in a shootout with the police officers. Okay. So he kills one police officer, and he's wounded in the arm by the other. And eyewitness reports later describe him as 5'9", husky. He's described as having gray eyes, and he's described as bleeding out in the neighborhood and looking for a ride.
Even during the trial, where one of the officers said that his eyes were a certain color, those were his eyes, where they said Imam Jamil al-Amin's eyes were a completely different color.
Completely different color, and Imam Jamil al-Amin is 6'5", very skinny, does not match the description of the shooter at all. And Otis Jackson, he later tells his parole officer that he was involved in a bit of an incident and quickly hangs up the phone. And he's later arrested for violating his parole on a whole nother thing. And police find, illegal guns in his home. They find all of these sorts of things. And later in a prison in Nevada, he tells an FBI agent that he confesses to the crime. He confesses to the crime another time in a written affidavit. When he's on trial for another thing, he's asked, and you can find this on whathappenedtorap.com. It's a 2. So what happened to rap? There's a video of Otis Jackson confessing on the stand that he killed a person while he's on for another crime. And
I saw that video. It was interesting.
Video, right? So the prosecutor asks him, didn't you also, kill this police officer? And he said, yeah, I did. And he says, why were you not arrested for that crime? And Otis Jackson himself looks a bit confused as to why he's not in jail for a crime that he repeatedly confessed to. Yeah. So instead, Imam Jamil al-Amin is arrested. He's placed on the FBI's most wanted list, and he's arrested in Whitehall, Alabama. And an FBI agent, he decides to ride separately from all the other FBI agents, and he arrests Imam Jamil al-Amin, and he spits on him and he kicks him, and the other FBI agents have to hold him back. So this one wonders, what is the hatred that he has for like a 55-year-old, religious leader who, spends his whole day just like praying 5 times a day. Um, so um, they find guns adjacent to him, but the guns don't have Imam Jamil al-Amin's fingerprints on them, and they are completely out in the open. They're not hidden in any way. So under this argument that the state eventually makes at the trial, Imam Jamil al-Amin completely cleared the guns. He cleaned the guns meticulously of any fingerprints, but he completely left them out in the open. He didn't hide the guns in any manner, which is a little bit ridiculous. And despite, these decades of FBI surveillance, he's been being spied on by the FBI since the 1960s. So for 40 years, the FBI has been spying on him, and they have 44,000 pages of documents on him, or 44,000 words of surveillance on him. There's no evidence linking him to these guns. The only evidence that links him to the guns are a ballistics investigation done by the Atlanta District Attorney's Office, done by the prosecutor's office. And the woman who does the ballistics evidence later linking him to the guns, she's eventually fired because of faulty things that she did in the past that led to false conclusions.
Wow.
So the only thing linking him to the guns is that, and it's later, revealed not to be true. Another man confesses to the crime. This is not included at the trial, and it's not included in any appeal since. And when Imam Jamil al-Amin is on trial, he starts off by inviting the judge and the jury to Islam. And his trial is a couple months after 9/11. So there's a lot of, Islamophobia and all this stuff.
Deleted at first, right? Because of 9/11? I'd read that.
I think so. I'm not sure, actually.
Okay.
But the trial is done in March of 2002. But he invites the judge and the jury to Islam, and that's how he starts. And there's some Islamophobia at the trial. So he says that as a Muslim, he doesn't believe in standing up for the jury. So he's granted the decision to sit, and the prosecution says, don't stand for such a man. At the end of the trial, they include what's called a mock cross-examination, in which the prosecutor asks questions, and then he answers them as he believes Imam Jamil al-Amin would answer them. And he doesn't testify himself at the trial. And every single court that this has been appealed to says that this violated his constitutional legal rights. But they say that there's no proof that this constitutional violation would anyway have reversed the decision. So, but there's actually an affidavit of a juror who said that if this constitutional violation didn't exist, if there was no mock investigation, then she would not have given him the guilty verdict, and that would have led to a hung jury, which would not convict him. So Imam Jamil al-Amin, his constitutional legal rights are violated, and there is evidence that these violations affected his chance of getting a trial. So eventually he is arrested, and he spent the past 20 years in prison. And in prison, there have also been sort of violations of his rights. So he spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He was moved in the middle of the night from a prison I believe in Georgia, to a prison in Arizona. They left him out in the heat. He wasn't given access to medicine. He has diabetes. He has cancer. He recently had a stroke. So his health is very, very poor. He has very bad eyesight, and he spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Yeah. And you would think that this would take a toll on such a man. But whenever people visit him, the first thing that he says to them is, he says, how can I help you? So he's a man dedicated to khidmah, to serving others. And he also says that as long as I can pray 5 times a day, I am satisfied with what Allah has given me. He hasn't been able to attend Jummah, the Friday prayers, while in prison. There's a story that someone told me once that the government, to sort of mess with him, the prison authorities, to mess with him, they put him in solitary confinement with like a white supremacist, someone with like, Nazi tattoos on his neck and all of this sort of stuff. And they thought that this, would kind of mess with him, you know.
Him at least.
Yeah, you know, chairman of SNCC, you know, civil rights movement guy in jail with like, you know, this epitome of racism, you know, this guy who probably reads like Daniel Pipes columns in his free time or whatever, right? Or at least kind of embodies the ideology of these sorts of people. And after a day or two, this white supremacist ends up converting to Islam.
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't even read that.
Yeah. So this is the power and kind of the charisma of this man.
Yeah, hikmah.
Yeah, very wise man. One of really the most important American Muslims of the 20th century.
Wow.
And now he is in prison, and he really has the best chance ever of he has the best chance that he's ever had of getting out. He spent the past 20 years in prison, and Atlanta's district attorney office, they've opened what's called the Convictions Integrity Unit. And they say in cases where there are these sort of convictions, we can relook at these cases and see if there's new information that can lead to kind of innocence.
Well, I mean, there's without a doubt, you know, I was reading about this one trial. I don't know where it happened, Mississippi or somewhere, where there was a guy, he's a black guy, and they say he shot the owner and 3 other workers inside of a furniture store. And he's been to trial like a few times since 2000, I believe. And they looked at his trial, and each time they found that there were flaws in the way they chose the jury. Like sometimes the prosecutor would intentionally use strikes and get out all the black, you know, jurors and have a jury of like, most of his trials were 11 white people and maybe 1 black person.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one trial where it was like, I think 4 black people and 8 white people. And that was the one where he got like a mistrial or a hung jury. And there was another one where the black lady was like, she was like, if they gave us the right information, which we know now, that we probably wouldn't have prosecuted him for the death penalty or whatever. And he finally got out, and they're not going to try him again. So, I mean, I can only imagine now, because of everything that's going on, if they look into it, it's going to be a completely different trial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and the interesting thing is on appeals, they were only able to appeal his constitutional rights violations. They have never been able to include new evidence, such as the Otis Jackson confession. So the fact that another man confessed to the crime who matches the eyewitness accounts of the shooter is really, really important evidence that needs to be included. So there's a new organization out called Students for Imam Jamil, and they've done a lot of really, really good work. One of the brothers who's really involved in this is a brother named Wasik Javed. He's doing really, really good stuff. And they were really pushing. Atlanta recently had a district attorney election. And the woman who won, her name is Fannie Willis. She, her parents were actually lawyers for Black Panthers in the past. So she's someone very, very connected to the struggle. And she said that she would be open to a retrial, to opening up a retrial, contingent on there being evidence. So, inshallah, the Otis Jackson confession will be enough.
I mean, if you listen to his confession, it's in so much detail that you can't make it up. You have to be like a great, you know, imaginary thinker to be able to make up details like that. And they're like, why would you want to confess basically to this? And if you look at the story and you read the story of what he said, the reason he was there, and I'm not saying he's a good guy or a bad guy, but the reason he was there, and then what happened afterwards, and he's like at the trial, he's like, I don't want somebody else to pay for my crime.
Uh-huh.
And it's just so appalling and so amazing when you watch it and you listen to it. You're like, there's no way this guy could have made this up or imagined all this. This had to happen for him to know. And it also matches the descriptions of what the cop said, or the cop, the one who lived, that what the guy looked like.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really appalling that he's even been in jail for these past 2 decades. But right now we have really the best chance to get him out. So the students for Imam Jamil, they really have like this link where you can email the DA's office. You basically put your name in, and you end up like filling out like 6 different forms, which are ways in which you can help Imam Jamil. So I would highly, highly encourage that you kind of check those guys out, and inshallah we can, right this wrong and get this innocent man who's been languishing in prison for 2 decades out of jail.
Inshallah.
Yeah. But that is that with regard to Imam Jamil Amin.
Honestly, I had wondered. I thought we were gonna go like a really long time, but I guess the topic. I mean, the topic for the most part is. I'm not gonna say it's simple, but it's pretty straightforward if you look at all the details. I mean, if you start reading Daniel Pipes, it makes it a little bit more complicated. But for the most part, it's not straightforward. But there's a lot of details out there. And then when you add in the Otis Jackson confession, it makes it pretty straightforward. When you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, they said that the guy wasn't really tall. He had such and such color eyes, and this guy is saying he's actually the one who did it, and he matches the whole description of what the cops said. And then they're like, well, there were bullet holes in his car. And the guy's like, I was standing in front of a Mercedes shooting. I mean, that's where the bullet holes came from.
Yeah, exactly.
So over the course of your studies at Harvard, doing your, Islamic studies degree, was this covered? Or this is something you guys do on your own time, like American Islamic history?
That's an excellent question. It was covered in a sense because the Muslim chaplain at Harvard, Imam Khalil Abdul Rashid, he was raised in Imam Jamil Amin's community.
Okay.
So he's really, really cool in the sense that he's kind of a resource on this community. And Imam Khalil has another kind of whole amazing story with regard to who his father was. His father was the first African-American mayor of Stone Mountain, Georgia, where the Ku Klux Klan was founded. Black Muslim mayor of this town. And for a while, he grew up in Imam Jamil Amin's community, and his family actually his house was basically like the community's library. So people would come into his house from, this community of 400 families to read books on Islam and all this sort of stuff. I also wrote a paper in grad school on the notion of spiritual of activism as a means of spiritual cultivation in Islam. So when you engage in sort of acts of benefiting others, it's also a means of sort of spiritually purifying yourself. So I wrote about Imam Jamil Amin's ideas of like spiritual cultivation through kind of cleaning up his community. And also this focus on the self as you are helping others. So he's benefiting the society around him, and he's telling those people in his community to benefit those around him, but he's also telling them that the first step to turning society around is turn yourself around. So it's this kind of oftentimes in Muslim communities today, you have this whole crowd of people who sit around and talk about like, oh, I need to work on myself, and they ignore the needs of society. And Imam Jamil Amin is saying, address the ills of society, but as you're addressing the ills of society, remember that the biggest ill that you need to address lies within you. And it's really, really profound because it's between this sort of quietism that is all about the cleaning up the nafs, but that ignores the problems of society. It's between that extreme and the extreme of those who, want to change the world, but are sort of, to put it very bluntly, like, people filled with all these diseases of the hearts. And this is one thing that a lot of people involved in activism will attest to, that it's a place of a lot of, riyah, a place of a lot of egos, all this sort of stuff. So Imam Jamil Amin's community is between that. They are people who, they have the good of these activists with lots of riyah in the sense that they're doing a lot of good for the world around them, but they're also purifying their own nafs in the way that these quietists are doing. Yeah.
I mean, it's if a person doesn't want to get, this is just something I'm going to put out there. Somebody's like, okay, well, I don't want to get involved in this. I don't know all the details. The least you can do is listen to these things that Hamzah just said. Read these things. I believe those are from his book, or they're from obviously.
Revolution by the Book by Imam Jamil Amin.
Yeah, you can read the book and at least get the benefit out of that, and change your own life. You don't want to change anybody else's life? Okay, that's fine. At least save yourself. That's the least you can do. And that's what it comes down to. Is a lot of times people, they disagree with certain things that certain people have done, or they disagree with, like, I don't like that guy or something like that. Okay, that's fine. You can disagree with somebody, but if they tell you something that's truthful, or they tell you something that's beneficial, the least you can do is try to save yourself from the fire of Jahannam.
Yeah.
Um,
There's and his kind of model reminds me of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. He's a very, very important Senegalese Islamic scholar, and he was involved in resisting French colonialism through the building of Quran schools, which is like a whole different talk in itself. But one of the colonial officials said about him that I wish he would stay on his prayer mat like all the other shuyukhs.
yeah,
I wish he didn't like engage in society. I wish he just prayed all day. And someone told Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse this, and he laughed and he said, "Tell them that if the Prophet Muhammad Islam only stayed on his prayer mat, that Islam would have never left Medina."
yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
very true. And one of the things, it was funny thing where you said earlier on, where you were talking about Imam Jamil and how if somebody didn't show for prayers for, I guess, a few days or a few prayers, he would go to the house. It was reminding me, going in Jamaat or going for Jola and going to visit people, and you knock on their door, and how they get perturbed. They're like, "Oh, why are you showing up at my door? I come to the masjid." It's like, no, it's like, it's just a reminder. And he's basically doing that, following in the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just reminding people. And that's one of the things, is a lot of times we think that what I'm doing is right or what I'm doing is correct. And if somebody comes to me, just maybe remind me or tell me something, they're basically laying this accusation on me that I'm doing something wrong. That it may not be you're doing something wrong, but you may have your ceiling may not be this low, your ceiling may be this high. Why aren't you reaching that high?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at his community, and I don't know if I've been to his community or not. I don't think I have, because during Hifz, I was in Atlanta for a few years, but we stayed at Al Farouk the whole time. But I'd really like to go see his community. Have you been there before or no?
Yeah, I've been to West End.
Oh, you've been to West End. Okay.
Yeah, the West End Community Masjid. It's close to Morehouse. It's close to Spelman. A
Okay.
lot of the historically black colleges and universities in Atlanta. It's a really, really nice community.
Is it still pretty similar? Like they still have all the Muslims living around, or it's a little bit different now?
So now it's being affected by gentrification,
Okay, yeah.
which is a whole other issue.
Property values by so much, and people pay property tax then.
I mean, the thing is actually, like, in a lot of kind of inner cities, the Muslims kind of give way to the gentrification because they clean up the neighborhood, they make it like very nice and very safe.
Yeah.
And these, suburban white folk come in and kind of destroy the fabric of the community. But West End is still going strong.
I see.
Yeah.
Is this store still there? Is it like somebody running it still, or what?
I'm not sure. There is a store across from the masjid.
Okay.
So I assume that's his store.
Okay.
But I've never actually been inside the store.
I mean, I guess that's a sort of Islamic American site which people should go visit and see that community, especially. I mean, it's like I believe in North Dakota they have like one of the oldest masajid in the United States, and it's basically it's like a little hut. And the people who came there, I guess the Moroccan travelers or whoever came there and stayed there, and obviously their grandchildren ended up becoming Christians or whatever they are, they've still held up the sanctity of the property, and it still looks nice. They keep up with it. There's a Quran in there. There's a prayer rug in there. People who pass through, they pray over there. But we don't want our communities to become like that. So we have to continue to go to the masjid, listen to the beneficial talks, and try to keep our communities vibrant. And that is a perfect example of seeing a community which is vibrant. And inshallah, I could hope and I pray it continues to stay vibrant so that we can go there and learn from it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what's it called? I told Hamzah that inshallah we'll try in the next few weeks to get together with a few other guys, and we'll see who we can get on and talk about what should be our plans and goals for the next 10 years as a Muslim community. Because that's one of the more important things, that as we have our leaders like Imam Jamil al-Amin who aren't available anymore, we need to have more leaders who are active in the communities as well. Because I know there's a lot of guys out there who are really active on a national level, and they've become these celebrities and stuff like that. But the communities at large are hurting and they need help. It's like they're crying for somebody to help them out, but I don't know what the heck's going on. I don't know if it's the people or if it's the leadership or what, or it's everybody together who needs help. But we need like a redirection for the
Yeah.
community at large,
Yeah.
where we know where we're going.
Yeah. فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But is that will that be it for today, or does Hamza have a few more nuggets to lay out for us?
Do you have any more questions or anything? I'm here as long as you want me.
Do I have any more questions? Have you been in touch with the son before?
I've been in touch with Kyrie, yeah. Follow him on Instagram. I got him on Facebook.
I
He's
see.
a very good brother. He actually became a lawyer, so he's helping kind of with the case and all of that.
I believe his mother is a lawyer as well, right?
Mother's a lawyer also, yeah.
Did she become a lawyer afterwards, or was she always a lawyer?
I'm not sure, actually. That's a good question.
It's very interesting that they're both lawyers, and I imagine there's more lawyers in the family.
Uh-huh.
But what's it called? But is the trial starting, or they're still in the process of getting that up and running?
They're still in the process of getting the DA, Fannie Willis, to agree to a retrial. There's stuff happening in the next few days and within the next in the coming moments with the students for Imam Jamil Al-Amin people. So I would really, really encourage people who really want to help out. Like, even if you want to give this case 5 minutes, it's very, very beneficial. Just check out students for Imam Jamil Al-Amin. Look them up on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram.
I believe they're pretty active on Twitter.
They're very active on Twitter. Yeah, and they're doing a lot of really, really good work.
Okay.
So I would check out these guys and try to help out with the case as much as you can.
Okay. So Jazakallah khair, Hamza, for your time. Inshallah, next week on Sunday, I'm not going to be doing Saturday. We're going to have a guest. His name is Umar Isa. He's a world-renowned nasheed artist from England. We're going to be having him, and he's going to be talking about the mercy and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon himself and upon all of us, and basically talking about how we as people, we struggle, and sometimes we see that somebody else may be doing better, but we don't know what's actually going on inside. Like a lot of people, you see them, they have millions of dollars, but they can't even sleep at night because they can't live with themselves. And inshallah, after that, the week after that, inshallah, we have a brother. His name is Ahmad Abdul Mateen Sabri. He's a hafiz. He's from Atlanta. He may actually know Kyrie pretty well. But what's it called? He's from Atlanta. He actually studied in Malaysia, the International Institute. I forget, was it Islamic Institute and University of Malaysia? I can't even say the name right.
Islamic International University of Malaysia.
There you go. Thank you. I butchered it. So
where Sulaiman did his PhD.
Umar Sulaiman did his PhD there.
Yeah.
Ahmed also has a PhD. His is in Islamic finance. So he's actually going to be talking about the debt trap. That's what our topic is going to be. The American debt trap, how they get everybody into debt, and how people consistently, they're living their lives trying to fight out of the debt. And we're going to be talking about that, inshallah. And then we also have, after that, I'm not trying to take away from Hamza. Alhamdulillah, Hamza gave us a good recourse, and he gave us, a good bit there about Imam Jamil. I mean, we're also going to have a Muslim, a soldier who's Muslim, and he's going to tell about his journey fighting out of PTSD and how getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what's helped him with this PTSD over the medicines. So we have, inshallah, the next few weeks should be pretty packed. But in between then, we're going to try to get Hamza on again if he's not too busy. He's a busy guy. What are you trying to become, a doctor now or something?
I don't know. I'm just trying to.
I
don't
even know right now.
Yeah.
But does your dad ultimately want you to become a doctor?
Like a medical doctor? Yeah. No, that is off the table.
He's like, please don't become a medical doctor.
If anything, it'll be like, the joke. It's like, oh, someone on the plane is dying. Do we have a doctor? And it's like, this man has a PhD in Islamic studies, and he says like, what is it?
I'm a doctor.
Yeah, he says, I'm a doctor, and they say, what can you do? And he's like, I have a PhD in Islamic studies. It's like, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Like, every soul will taste death.
By that time, that person would be like, I'm better off gone. Have an Islamic study. Well, at least you could try to convince them to read the kalima before they pass away, possibly. If you had that thing going on like Imam Jamil Al-Amin, where they put him in the cell with the white supremacists for a few days, and the guy ends up becoming Muslim. Like, crap, this is not what we were supposed to do.
Yeah.
But Jazakallah khair, Hamza. Jazakallah khair really for your time. for the information and for telling us about, what we should be following, what we should be looking for the next few days. And we should especially be making dua for all of our brothers and sisters who are wrongly imprisoned, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them justice. And all of our brothers and sisters all throughout the world who are suffering, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make their suffering easy. And, those are relatives and friends and family members who have passed away. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make their graves one of the gardens of paradise. And may He give us all Jannah and the highest level of the Jannah. Jazakallah khair. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Ameen.